Hello everyone, welcome to this Westford bike tour. I am your host, Michael Tricca, or host is a fancy way of saying it, and we're going to start our journey here at the Westford Museum. This video is composed of 3 routes I took at different days, different times, to give you a sense of the beauty of this town. They all start at the Westford Historical Society Museum, as I said, which is a center of Westford culture and history, and it's also conveniently located in the center of town. This building used to be the old high school, the museum building, which is very exciting. The high school has been through 4 iterations over the years, and our goal is to pass by each one of them as we move along this journey. On your right is the Parish Center for the Arts. Host to many local artists. People can rent out the space for use of programs as they wish. To the left is the J.V. Fletcher Library. We'll come back to the library. Lots of history behind that, but plenty more opportunities to pass by it as it's deeply rooted the family in local tradition. On our right now is Town Hall. And as people like to say nowadays, this is a fun joke that the kids say now in regards to this street sign. I sure hope it does. Anyhow, coming up on our left is the Rodenbush Community Center, the second high school after what is now the Westford Museum. Can be too small for its class size. Rodenbush was founded as the high school in 1897, and it served in that function till 1955. And then after that, it was what is now the Abbott Elementary School, which we will also be coming up on, and then Westford Academy as it is today. The Rodenbush building was constructed by one William C. Edwards, who was a prominent builder of his time period in the region. Edwards also built Town Hall and was on the school committee. The J.V. Fletcher Library, which we passed recently, was also built by Edwards after getting some immense funding from the man it was named for, Jonathan Varnum Fletcher. We can see with that manure sign, Westford is a place that is deeply rooted in its agricultural history. That's why we have the Apple Blossom Festival. That's why we have so many fields and farms around. And while it has maintained that tradition, it's also a place that is growing at a very rapid rate, and it is a center for a lot of culture and new ideas and new technologies. For example, the Puma Headquarters, like the athletic wear, is located in Westford. It's actually in one of our technology parks, which is a funny little thing that I don't know how many people know that. But when you think about just such massive corporations that have found this idealized use for this space, that's the Westford Knight, by the way. I'm going to cut in, or a memorial to the historical figure, and we can get more into Westford Knight theory later on in the trip. But for now is the Abbott School. As I said, the third high school for only a few years, 55 to 73, that is 1900s, until it was moved to a current spot. Named for not a specific Abbott, but the Abbott family. Now, the Abbotts were intrinsic in the town's industrial growth. The Abbott Mills are, as you know, or as will become evident, essential in the growth of the town, and it brought in immigrants from Russia. We have a Russian cemetery, from Ireland and from Europe during the early 1900s and the late 1800s. But for example, some Abbotts are John W. P. Abbott, who was a Harvard grad. Westford has a lot of those. Who studied law at Cambridge. He was a selectman, town clerk, state senator, and he is the one, W.P. Abbott, who founded the Abbott Worsted Co. with his son and Mr. Sargent. I'm going to fly down here. My apologies for the lack of camera stability. This is a camera that is mounted on my helmet right now, so I'm doing my best to keep it steady for you. But enjoy the kinetic energy, yeah? Coming up on one of the railways. Hopefully during this trip I don't get hit by any cars. We'll see. I've made it this far. And, bumpiest part of the trip. These railways are also a marker for how Westford was so instrumental and how it expanded so easily, in that it was connected very directly to a lot of other industrial cities, such as Lowell, which is the big one of the region. So Abbott Worsted Company specifically made worsted is a special type of textile, and it was produced en masse here. Other industries include Fletcher's Quarry, which has granite that has made it down to a lot of the buildings in the capital. Is our little claim to fame, is how close we are to that. And there are also a lot of Fletchers in town, which will again become very evident as we keep going through the list of people. But right now we're just taking it through some back roads. Nowadays, this street is known as the Highway to New Hampshire, essentially, because that's basically what it is. This is Westford's main connecting route to Nashua and where a lot of people go for work. This is how people get to centers of like technology and industry nowadays when they aren't in town. But especially recently, my father was part of the big tech boom that happened, where a lot of people would come to Westford because a lot of tech firms were connected via 495. And 495 was something that Westford became visible from when it's now called Four Corners, but it used to be called Minot's Place when Mr. Minot set up the first shop there. And nowadays, there's the big flag to base. It's like flagging down people from the highway and everything. But it's very, very visible now once shopping became available and that became a commercial center. John Abbott, in regards to the Abbott School, also laid the cornerstone for the Bunker Hill Monument. Another Harvard grad. He was also in the state Senate. He worked on the state constitution. Abiel Abbott is an MIT grad. It's crazy the colleges these people come from, but it speaks to Westford's intellectual academic culture. He was a chairman at the J.B. Fletcher Library, the school committee, WA trustee, and the National Association of Wool Manufacturers, which is fitting with wool. On our right is one of Westford's many cemeteries, and that sounds like a somewhat dark observation, but in looking at Westford's cemeteries, we are able to find the different populations that came through and the different people. The cemetery that we just passed was one of the originals, and that's been here since the 1700s. And I want to say it's Pine Hill Cemetery, or Nutting Cemetery, which makes sense because it is on Nutting Road. I believe we'll pass through Pine Hill later in the trip. My desire was to record audio with this project, but the camera that I had, it does its job, and it's reliable in that way, but it doesn't have the requisite sound. So I wanted to let this be more of a narrative, and I think that'll capture it better. I could put some music in the background, but again, I think it's almost more impactful to be able to just sort of drink it in this way. And I will be sure to narrate. Right now, it's in the evening. You can tell Westford's classifies as an exurb, so it's not rural, but it's not suburban either. And aside from the sound of the cars, it's just the wind and the birds. I took this footage at about 5, 6, 7 o'clock in the evening. So the sun is setting beautifully. New England, right? So you have beautiful trees, foliage in the fall is absolutely magnificent, and we're getting just those bloomings of spring and summer now. We are coming up on our left is the Stonybrook School. Now, the Stonybrook School acts as a middle school, also features the Veterans Memorial Complex. And also sharing the Stonybrook name is the Stonybrook Railroad, which was the first in Westford, and it connected the town. It was between Lowell and Ayr. So, yeah, we owe a lot to another cemetery. We owe a lot to our grounding in this industry, the wool industry, and the quarries. But Westford is also part of a large apple belt, it's called, which is essentially where I believe it was 2/3 of this area gets their apples from. And it's an area stretching from across much of New England. That's also where we get the Apple Blossom Festival, which is our local event that happens every year. The Apple Blossom Festival has been going on. It was somewhat sporadic for a little while in its early years due to World War II and the like. But it kicked back up. This was its 50th anniversary since it was more constant in 1968. This year's Apple Blossom Queen was Emily Doolin, and who was a classmate of mine. It's neat to see how people grow into those roles. And last year was Olivia Overington, who was a good friend of mine. The Apple Blossom Queen is crowned not based on appearance, but rather on service to the community and their interviews with the committee and what they have brought as a person and their citizenship, really, which is a theme that Westford seems to focus on. A lot of Westford residents end up giving back to the community in a way that's often very significant and profound. One of my major sources for this project, and immense thanks goes out to him, was Mr. Bob Oliphant, who has basically dedicated himself to town history. He has helped create presentations. He has Jeff Hall, another member of the town, has been doing these village talks each year, focusing on a different Westford village each time. So most recently I went to his Nabnasset presentation, and it was beautiful seeing he went through and talked about all the houses and towns and different places in Westford, and just there was a sense of most of the attendants of the program were old, and by old I mean wise, of course, but people who had been around Westford for a while longer, and it was a matter of they had the opportunity to pore over history with Mr. Jeff Hall and experience this. It was very profound. Like it was them reminiscing on the past and what things were like, and in that way it was visiting. We'll come back to that. Right now, we are in the MIT Lincoln Labs Haystack Observatory, which was put in place in Westford as a project the gun in the 60s as part of a retaliatory effort against Cold War communications warfare. And the details were, the project itself was called Project Needle, hence needle in a haystack. And it was founded by MIT Lincoln Labs as now it's used for planetary observation and monitoring of the tectonic plates, but originally it was missile defense, long-distance missile defense during the Cold War. So this is the radio telescope at Westford. It uses X-band radar, and it bounces communications off of dipoles in space, and it shares data with the California sister lab. It helped with observing topography of the moon for the Apollo landing, and it broadcasts at 115 gigahertz, I believe. The auxiliary radar at the complex is used for satellite imaging and its space debris data collection. And Haystack ultra-wideband satellite imaging radar was used to detect missiles and doubles for use in astronomy nowadays. Right now, they're looking for stars via radio emission of the gases that are active there. And they're using it to develop new radio techniques like shortwave radio observation of black holes. It's known as the Geodesic Dome, which is what the larger complex is surrounded by, protected from New England weather. And geodesy is the measuring and understanding of Earth's shape, spatial orientation, and gravitational fields. So it's incredible, frankly, the type of scientific advancement that's taking place in Westford through these facilities and through the technologies and techniques they're pioneering. There's also incoherent scatter radar, which studies the upper atmosphere and ionosphere. It's funny to think about how much technological advancement was caused by the wars, because MIT Haystack Observatory, ionospheric observation, because the U.S. was worried that the Russians could tap into the undersea lines for communications. So they wanted to develop this secondary form of communication. Tends to get busy around this time that I happen to be recording. This is when everyone's coming home from a number of people. I imagine most of the population of Westford commutes using that aforementioned highway to Nashville, highway to New Hampshire. It's a beautiful commute. Let me tell you something. Through this place, the sun's warm, but it's cool out. Westford is the perfect paragon of New England weather. And we managed to stay away from a lot of crazy storms, except for if you count ice storms. We've had a lot of recently, and big snowstorms. We typically get a lot of time off from school, which is nice. The last time Westford had a big cataclysmic storm was we managed to get a tornado back in the early 1900s. Which is, we haven't had one since, knock on wood, but it's crazy to think about. All right, we are coming up on that brick building at this intersection is called the Old Brick Tavern, which is a pretty self-explanatory name, right? It is one of the few historic taverns of Westford, and it was a very popular joint around this long sought-for pond area. In 1908, it was raided and bagged by the police for this illegal selling of liquid extracts, and they were sent off with a slap on the wrist, and they were fined $75. That pond on our left is Long Sought For Pond. And it's called Long Sought For Pond was because early settlers had heard about the place from whether it was Native American reports or other colonists, and it took them 4 days to find it, which is ironic because it's long sought for pond, 4 days. But it's one of Westford's many lakes and ponds and bodies of water, which are very, can only have served to make it very habitable back when it was first being settled and colonized. In regards to that settlement and colonization, at one point during this tour, we are going to come across the Keys residence, and that'll be coming up soon, actually. But it is the first Westford permanent white resident we're thinking is, according to reports, a man named Solomon Keys. And his house is on Francis Hill Road, a road he actually, or not necessarily that he named, but a road that was named for his wife, Frances. We're just flying along here. Lots of hills and valleys in Westford. Edgar Allan Poe actually stayed in Westford for a while, for about 3 days, it's said, because he was visiting his love interest. Let me find it in my notes for you. I believe he called her Annie. But Poe said that given the opportunity to live in Westford would be a paradise, which is something very flattering, actually. We have a monument to Poe, or not necessarily a monument, but a place in his honor from when he visited. He was good friends with one Mr. Haywood, and it was yes, Sherman Haywood, and it was his family that he actually fell in love with. And I'll get that information to you guys. Yeah, Westford life would be a paradise. It's funny to think Westford had a lot of famous passers-by. We're now heading through the Russell's Way area, and right now we're on Vineyard Road. But it's a testament to how effectively Westford has expanded to accommodate this suburban development. And these are a series of roads. There's a multitude of roads, such as this. There's Hyacinth Drive, places off Cold Spring. There are new developments now that are down the street from me. That, especially during there have been the series of booms. There was the industrial boom. There was the first technology expansion, and then that has brought in more and more waves of people as Westford becomes more accessible through, again, 495, as was discussed before. This area back here is just absolutely massive. And Westford tends to be high property value, and it's evident in the homes. But it's just you look at the streets and there's constant expansion. It's consistently growing. We've passed by and we will continue to pass by a number of houses, a number of residences, a number of buildings that are being rebuilt and that are growing out and that are expanding. It doesn't show any signs of stopping. All right, we're coming up on the Rita Miller School. This is another big Westford family dynastic name, is the Millers. And Mr. Miller named this school after his daughter. Other schools include the Day School, the Blanchard School, but Westford's family names are very present in its current state. Beautiful elementary school, very accessible to the nearby population. As we continue down this road, the sun is shining, the birds are singing, and it's a place that's also, I ought to mention, very accommodating to cyclists. It was nice. It was good being able to work on this project in such an ideal area for it. Can see people we pass by wave. It tends to be a friendly bunch, but it's always fun to see. It's always fun to see who waves or not. But it's generally a very welcoming community, and naturally, there are always going to be exceptions, and there are always going to be different people who have different experiences. But I've found the degree to which people are willing to be welcoming and thoughtful is good in Westford. So while we're talking about, with Miller, the different names around Westford, I want to also go into Robinson, which we won't necessarily pass by in this project, but his name stands to mention because Colonel John Robinson was, as his rank would suggest, a colonel in the Continental Army. He was the highest ranking officer at Concord, the Battle of Concord, but he chose to cede his command to the man who was more familiar with the regiment he was with. So it was a little humble thing he did there. He served at the Battle of Bunker Hill, and there's a school named for him, the Robinson School, which is another elementary school. We have our John Robinson Day, which is unofficially recognized by the Westford Eagle, the local paper. There are a lot of stories that tend to abound about him when the time rolls around. I want to give special thanks while we have an opportunity to Penny and Deb at the Westford Historical Society, who were very accommodating in the work on this project. The Westford Historical Society is a place that sustains Westford culture and history and seeks to make it more alive to the residents of the town, which is something that I think is interesting that you don't necessarily see as often, but the very specific statement of making it more real and alive. And that evokes like a very powerful mission just in how they have managed to achieve that. The Westford Museum features many exhibits that are very intimate with the history of the town. They'll often have. I was in the offices one day, and Penny was like, "I have to go, Michael. I'm going to leave you by yourself. I have to be a mill girl for the day." But then she ran out and she was gone. But it's doing these activities that that really bring in a sense of community to the place. There's the third graders. They go on third grade trips to the Westford Museum for like museum tours and stuff. They have a very good opportunity. All right, we're crossing onto Forest Road. The fun part about that road is Forest on the street sign is spelled with 2 R's, but the history of the road is that's just a typo. There's no one named Forest in Westford, like at the time period where that road was named at the very least. So it's just a road that has it's Forest with 2 R's. No special significance aside from just the fun little mishap. Now's a good opportunity to address the Westford Knight, I think, which we passed by when we first started going downhill. Westford Knight is said to be either from a group of Templars that came to America and it was a memorial to one that had fallen, or some people theorize that it is Native American carving, which also seems highly likely. People who are in love with the romantic ideal see a man holding a shield and a sword, which is frankly what I think to be interesting as well. There's no hard evidence about one way or the other. But one of our local residents, Mr. David Brody, is an author of 5 novels. He was voted best local author by the Boston Phoenix, and his claim to fame here is that he wrote a great book that I actually have in my house, The Cabal of the Westford Knight, where he goes into the romantic history of who the knight could be, and the story of these Templars. It's the type of thing where it's more local legend than town history necessarily, just because of the unknown appeal of it. Westford Academy, the mascot used to be the Black Knight, except it was changed to the Gray Ghosts after actually there was a show about a Confederate general whose nickname was the Gray Ghost, and apparently the actor was very attractive. And that's how the name got changed. The alumni wanted to find something that was more compelling to them as a graduation thing. But yeah, Cabal of the Westford Knight by David Brody. I cannot admit to having read the entire book. I have read segments, picked it up out of curiosity, and it's a very fascinating read. It follows someone as they are. They're being hunted by this sect as well to uncover the secrets of this Westford Knight. Mr. Brody is still a very active resident within the town. Books are featured at the J.B. Fletcher Library naturally, because how couldn't we, you know? In regards to other big Westford names, we've had a number of local celebrities, such as Aaron Stanford. He played opposite Sigourney Weaver in a movie called Tadpole, a smaller movie. He went on to also play Pyro in X2 and X-Men The Last Stand. And he played Seymour Burkhoff in the CW series Nikita. So it's neat. We got a nice little local actor. He went to Rutgers in relatively recent times. There's also Westford had the first female graduate of MIT, and let me find her name. It'll be any time now where I am able to find her name. Let me also explain the format of this. I am going through, yes, her name was Ellen Richards. First woman at MIT, first American woman accepted into any school of science and technology, and she was the first woman to earn the chem degree. She went on to establish the water quality standards in the U.S., and she founded what would become the American Association of Family and Consumer Sciences. Very impressive woman. And she's very local. So where was I? Yes. My format of this is I'm taking a conversational approach to this, where my goal is to create something that is as naturalistic and conversational as possible, and letting it go into a free flow, kind of getting ideas out, getting thoughts out about town, because I want this to be a bit of reminiscing, a bit of historical tour, a bit of thoughts on the state of the town. And so I have my notebook out, I have my works cited and everything, and I'm reading to you as things come up. So I cannot promise seamless facts and transitions, but my goal is to get some thoughtful musings as we take this journey together. Right now we are passing through the Nabnasset area of Westford, which is one of the most thickly settled, and it is home to the Nabnasset School. We passed by the house of recently, as we go by the Nab Golf Club, the country club. They always have this board out with different messages that they'll change depending on the day. Very nice positive messages to drive by. They had a good one on Mother's Day. Nab is also home to, when I did mention the country club, there is, as I mentioned earlier, Jeff Hall did his series of presentations, and most recently it focused on Nab, and that's where it's hosted. Up in here we have one of the buildings that was bought by Abbott. This is the old Brookside Mill, which was originally owned by George Moore, but was bought by Mr. Abbott as he expanded his industrial business. So this is a vital center for what the town's history was, and it now makes for a lovely residential area, which is what a number of the mills have been converted to. Is they served some vital growth in the town. They fell out of repair, out of business, and now they're back as places of where people live and places where people will spend their time, being refurbished. Mr. Yule, I believe his name is a person that has dedicated a lot of resources into making these old buildings new again. And the main Abbott Worsted company, I should say, is a place where he bought the old mills, and he turned them into a series of like fancy apartments. Not necessarily fancy, but they have like this neat industrial feel to them. It's very neat. One of my mentors, Mr. Dennis Canty, lived in them for a while. And it's a neat area. There's also, we'll pass by the Mill Works, which is a Westford community center, rec center, and it used to be a paper mill, and it is now host to, they have a theater, they have basketball courts. They're constantly hosting tournaments for the junior NBA called Zero Gravity. They are expanding rapidly, and it's a great place for people to get together. Like residents have discounts and stuff, and it's just a local community place. They have a restaurant that's coming in, and again, it's expanding. It's expanding rapidly because Westford is in that position where they're just growing out. Here is very neat. So Francis Hill Road, I mentioned Solomon Keys earlier, and this isn't quite it, but tucked away back there, one of the oldest residences in town. We're going to get a closer look here. And it isn't quite it, but coming up, we're going to take a left up here, and I believe it'll be on our right. But the Keys house, yeah. Solomon Keys. Francis Hill Road is also marked as a Westford Historic and Scenic Road, which Westford has a number of those, which means buildings in there are subject to certain regulations as to what appearance they can take to preserve the natural rural beauty of the town. And they're on a national register of historic roads and the like. I also have a friend who lives up here. Very nice house, very nice guy. Footage gets a little choppier the more difficult it is to pedal. Westford Scenic Road. Yeah, that house that I currently have my gaze fixed on. The Solomon Keyes house. It's crazy to think. 1600s is where these original residences are from. The time period. At this moment in time, the birds are chirping magnificently. Not so present of a wind, but it's all just surrounded by the sounds of nature. And this is a road where it doesn't experience heavy traffic, so it's just this quiet little oasis of peace. Creates an absolutely beautiful atmosphere. But I can only imagine what it's like living on these roads. Present in Westford are a lot of these stone walls, and what their original purpose tends to be is you see them near farms and the like, such as with this. Here I try and fix my gaze on it properly, focus the camera on it. But they're left over from colonial efforts to create farms, and just to create these growing areas for their fields. And they were used to mark off fields and the like. But now they serve as lovely little property features. It's funny, it really does feel like you're going very fast when you're on a bicycle, even if you're going 20 miles an hour, because you have the wind in your hair. You can hear everything rushing by. I label this as a bike tour of Westford because I'm on a bike, but I highly encourage you to get on a bike as well. I'll be posting as part of my presentations, and I hope to keep as part of this this project in general, a resource that accompanies it, the map from the 3 routes I've taken. And it's a town that's very bikeable, very scenic, very conducive to this kind of effort. Plus, I'm just a sap for being out in nature on a bike, especially. Ooh, lens flare. I always think of the Star Trek movies when I see this much lens flare by J.J. Abrams. It's his signature style. I mean, that's unimportant to this project right now, but I want to take the opportunity to talk about civic service in Westford, and how I've mentioned a number of residents who have defined themselves through their service to the town, or through their achievement. Ellen Hardy was vital to the founding of the Road and Bridge Community Center in 1973. She is known as the mayor of Westford. I happen to know her granddaughter, another wonderful person. but she is someone called the mayor of Westford just because of her sheer commitment to the town and how much she networks and connects with people. She created the Westford Directory. She was the first female selectman. She was town moderator for a while. She started the recycling program in '88. It's so impressive to see, and I've found so many examples in town of what people are capable of when they just dedicate themselves to a place that they care about. This is one of Westford's apple orchards on our right. As I said, we were part of the Apple Belt, where we provided 2/3 of the region's apples. It's something we were pretty darn good at from the prominence of it. Another place in Westford is Drew Farms, which is more towards Tadmuck, and that is a place where people can just walk in and pick apples. It's honestly one of the most delicious local businesses I could think to have access to. In regards to other delicious local businesses, Kimball's Ice Cream is a place we are known regionally for. Founded by Clara and Jack Kimball when they sold ice cream out of their backyard, essentially, in 1939. And it's grown into, they practically have an amusement park back there. With the sheer expansion, they make a lot of money off of that ice cream. But again, it's a place right on the main road leading into Littleton, so it's very well connected to the outside regions. But Kimball's Farm Ice Cream, absolutely fantastic place to go during the summer. Most of Westford, you can walk for 10 minutes and find something to do, or somewhere to eat at least. And it's nice in that it's a very close community, and everything seems very close together, but it's also like a big town. There's lots of room to explore. Like, we're coming up on the spirit of adventure, I like to think is captured in a street that's going to be on what's called Sinbad Street, like the adventure from Arabian Nights. But Westford is about 27,000 residents, and it is one of the largest towns in Middlesex County. Let me find some basic preliminary data on it. So Westford didn't start out as Westford. It was originally part of Chelmsford, and we got a little triangle from Groton. It's the 28th town in Middlesex County, and in September 23rd, 1729 was when it was incorporated from Chelmsford. It was originally titled as Westford, but they specified that into Westford when it started getting more official and everything. Now, it's very important to note the people who were originally here, which are the Pawtucket, Wamasett, and Neshoba tribes. Neshoba in the language means trembling mountain, and I'll get you the specific translation for that. But it's because apparently there were earthquakes around the area where Neshoba Valley Ski Area now is, which is another local business. The ski area was actually run by the Fletchers. Again, another popular Westford name. And let's see. Pamela Fletcher is someone who used to spend a lot of time, grew up in the area of Neshoba Valley Ski Area, and she was part of the U.S. ski team for 9 years. Very significant member. She shattered her leg eventually, just as she was becoming the one of the favored people to win the Olympics for ski, but now she covers Olympic events elsewhere from a reporting standpoint. So she stays involved. I want to jump back to the J.V. Fletcher Library now. It's a library which we passed in the center of town, built by Edwards, and it was built after gaining immense funding from the man it was named for. Jonathan Varnum Fletcher is what the J.V. stands for, which is something I always wanted to know. But Mr. J.V. Fletcher was a statesman who donated $14,000 in 1896. A lot of money back then. A lot of money now towards the construction of the edifice. We're coming up on the Parkerville Schoolhouse. We're in the Parker Village section of Westford right now, is where we segued to. And this is another great place where school trips happen. And the kids, you'll see if you look closely, if I turn my head in that direction, yep, will dress up in period garb, and they'll have a day of classes at the Parkerville Schoolhouse, as the children there would have had. The schoolhouse naturally is no longer actively active as a school, but it serves as a valuable way to teach history, and a place where it is highly evident in its preservation and in its continual use. Coming up on the Jack Walsh Field. This road we're on right now is basically a straight path to Acton. Westford is very good in its connectedness to these other towns. Also nearby is the Bruce Freeman Rail Trail, which just recently, in the recent weeks of this May 2018, has opened up its a new section of its rail trail. Rail trail is, I like to call it a bike path because that's what I ride on it, but it's a walking path as well, built upon the old railroad tracks. And I believe there are a number of railroad tracks. There's the red line, then there's the line we passed by earlier, going over in our first stage of the journey. And these rail trails provide just this beautiful scenery. They're sequestered in the trees, in this opportunity to take a glimpse and to glide through the surrounding area, more uninterrupted by cars and less evident of less worry about being run over and more appreciation of the scenery and the places around you. That's been labor of love for the past number of years. The Bruce Freeman Rail Trail stretches way back. I had the opportunity to interview Mr. Oliphant a little bit for my project. He consulted my routes and the like on the different things I chanced upon. And I asked him what an outsider ought to know about Westford and what would appeal to Westford to people unfamiliar with it. And he said it was its ability to maintain its colonial charm while still being a town that is very present in the current day and in the future. And then I asked him what he wanted residents to understand about Westford who wouldn't necessarily think about it as much before. And he said that there is a lot of history in Westford that people who can live here for all of their life don't know about. And that was very striking. Here's the Bruce Freeman Rail Trail. Cuts along right next to the road. But going off of what Mr. Oliphant had stated through that, it's an understanding of the place a person lives, I think, can be intrinsic to a person's understanding of their own identity, because it is this knowledge of where you grew up and potentially what made you the person that you are now. Oh, we have a little bit of the strap of the camera in the lens. Never mind that. But to continue off of that, it's people don't need to be shaped by the town they grew up in. And I know a lot of friends that have no desire to identify as intrinsically Westford. But the ability to understand that and to appreciate where you're from, I think has the potential to be essential in how a person can view themselves, and something to be proud of is this history where we have MIT graduates, Harvard graduates, colonels in the Continental Army, people who were instrumental in the growth of our country. Paul Revere was someone who was close to Westford, in that his son and daughter ended up going here. He cast it at Westford Academy. He cast a bell that was melted down, recast, melted down, recast. But he casted it as a gift for Westford Academy, and it's still here today in Westford's WA's Bell Lobby, in the modern building, in the modern day building. That's currently acting as the high school of the 4 different buildings which have held that role. Gotta love that bike sign, cyclist awareness. Getting close to the border of Carlisle now. We won't actually be spending much time in Carlisle, but it's helpful to know. So yeah, speaking to appreciation of the place where someone grows up being essential to, not necessarily essential to who they end up being, but a vast part of it, depending on what you choose to give and take from that. People who grow up in Westford can count themselves among a historic population in the United States. This was a place where things happened. And while it may not be a foremost place on the map today, it has a quiet brilliance to it in its place in history and also its role in the modern day. It has a technology park, which we'll pass by at some point. We might have already passed by it. But I don't believe so. that houses industries such as tech firms like Red Hat, and Sonus Networks, which is a big telecommunications company. And Red Hat works on operating systems and the like. It's constantly growing and expanding. Also interesting to note, we're past the NAB area now. One of the things that Jeff Hall mentioned in the NAB talk, NAB night, was if we're talking about Westford's place on the map, there used to be a local, Chelmsford border, I was close, not Carlisle. There used to be a large regional theater in Westford. Theater in the sense of drama and like live person entertainment. This is me checking the directions. And again, it was an essential spot. Eventually, it got converted to a barn, and then its use was discontinued. But it was part of the Little Theater movement. The theater itself was called the Lakeshore Theater, and it was in the NAB area. And it was just like the perfect place for a theater because of the railroads that came through Westford and where it was on all these different routes. Back in 1935, the cost of purchasing a home in Lakeshore, near that theater that I mentioned, was $89 to purchase the land. $89. If I could go back in time to that, I'd buy a ton of houses. I'd invest in real estate. And it'd be a really darn good investment, I like to think, knowing the town as it is today. But that's what inflation will do. In regards to the founding of Westford Academy, as Westford was expanding, by now it was in the, it had just transitioned out of Rodenbush and was in its Abbott era. They actually had a study by a Harvard graduate. Was it? It was still in the Rodenbush phase, but this Harvard graduate study determined that Westford was highly capable of building a 6-year high school offering competitive education. And the original Westford Academy Rodenbush building had a capacity of 525 people, which Westford quickly outgrew. And that's another important feature of Westford is its education, where Westford Academy is today a highly competitive 4-year high school. Is that's what people tend to come to Westford for, is they come for the schools and they come for the businesses. I might also add, as someone highly involved in it, Westford Academy has an excellent theater program. And Westford in general has a very strong foundation in the arts, as well as you've heard about all these Harvard and science, MIT graduates. But I would encourage the examination of whether it's theater arts or musical arts in Westford, because there's a lot of good people taking a lot of pride in what they do. A lot of townies. Mr. Michael Towers, our artistic director, has been living in Westford since high school. not the entire time naturally, but he spent a lot of time there. And again, significant figure who has established this foundation based on the time they spent in their hometown with their understanding and appreciation of it and the people there. And the work that Westford Academy Theatre Arts does is, well, I can't say too much because it would be self-congratulatory, but it's very reassuring to have a town that is willing to invest in the arts as Westford does. It tends to be a sign of a stable economy and a stable academic environment where people are able to put this time into pursuits such as the arts. Just passed the 4-H fairgrounds recently. Events that the 4-H hosts are most recently I was at. We have a bike tour called the Run for Live, Ride for Live, which is in memory of Olivia Marchand, who her and her mother were the subjects of the victims of a domestic violence. Olivia Marchand lost her life, and her mother, her husband, it was an incident of gun violence, and pardon me for, I can't find the right words for it, but every year the town comes together and they offer a scholarship based on that in Olivia's memory. And the Run for Live, Ride for Live, everyone gets together and raises money to help fight domestic abuse. Right now, we are passing through the Mystery Spring area of Tadmok. Mystery Spring is marked as Mysterious Spring on the 1800s maps of Westford, and it is known as, the camera footage gets very wobbly as I go on foot. It is this spring of water through this giant, not giant, but just babbling from this cleft rock, and it's called Mysterious Spring, Mystery Spring, because this water just seems to be coming out of nowhere, like out of this rock, out of this solid rock is pouring forth this stream. It's very neat, but it's something that has had attention called to it for quite a long time. And now people who live in this Tadmok Road, in this area, can just walk to it. It's also close to 495, so it looks idyllic in this video that lacks background noise, but it's important to note it is right next to the highway, so it's shaky, the footage, and while it appears like it's a very peaceful spot, it is privy to highway noise, but inspiring nonetheless. Here we go. I thought it would be marked by a monument of some sort, or something much more grand. But no, it was just a nice little. The only thing that here, I'm going to take the helmet off. Let's see how shaky this gets. The only thing that marks it is people's ability to take interest in it and take note of it. Mysterious, ain't it? You know. All you can hear. Well, not all you can hear. The primary sounds now are just the babbling of the spring. The wind in the trees. Birds chirping. This was a day especially where there were a lot of bugs out, but a lot of other things too. You could see birds. See a lot of wilderness. Sometimes if you're lucky enough, you catch deer in those woods. Actually, on this bike trail, I passed by one of the farms. There was a whole herd of deer. Right now we're at Westford Academy, the current building, and the bike racks around the side. I have always wanted to, it is my goal to, at some point, fund an awning being built over these bike racks to protect bikes from the rain and the weather. But that's just an abstract goal for the future. Right now we're going to make our way through this. Again, Westford Academy is the fourth iteration of the establishment. It is highly competitive. It appeared recently in a survey calling it one of the it was like the top school in Westford or something. But it's just in that regard, it's a place where the faculty take great pride in their work, the people that work there, and they're very rooted in their mission to make it a good place to attend. Another cemetery we're passing by here. This is the water department. Past that's a cemetery. We didn't have a chance to go by it in this tour, but I want to call some attention to the Russian Brotherhood Cemetery, which is a place where I mentioned earlier that the industries, which we are on our way to the Abbott Mills right now, brought in a lot of immigrants. Especially Abbott had people like going out to these to advertise. There were a lot of Polish people, a lot of Polish residents who came over. There are records of World War I drafts in the Western Museum, and in Polish and Russian and Italian, because those were all like that was the populations that were available. There were and German, I believe, as well too. But it was just this vast variety of people that came over. The Russian Brotherhood Cemetery, not this one again, but it was a place that was founded in 1918, and it was put on the National Registry of Historic Places in 2005. I have a friend who their family is deep rooted in Westford, and you can see she'll always pass by the cemetery and be like, "Yep, there's Grandpa." Maybe it's great grandpa. It's probably great grandpa. A lot of houses are close to a lot of schools in Westford. As we saw, there was the Rita Miller School on Russell's Way. It used to be that Westford had 10 regional schools. One of them was the Parkersville Schoolhouse. And these were places where, especially where the town's so large, where it was made sure that they were accessible. And nowadays, as transportation has become more advanced and more efficient, naturally there are less schoolhouses because the schoolhouses are more widely spread, I should say. We are now making our way down to Abbott Worsted Company, where worsted wool was processed. This was founded by Mr. Abbott and Mr. Sargent, as well as Mr. Abbott's son. They were all major industrialists in the area, and these have again been converted to apartments now. Sargent also ran. Charles Sargent opened Calvert and Sargent, which was a place that produced wool making machines. So Sargent made machines for Abbott who made the textiles. So it was this nice industrial cycle that they had. And as you can see coming up, the Westford, the Abbott Mills are right on a railroad. Incredible. And now people live here. The history creates the future, essentially. I wonder if that's the same UPS truck. But yeah, the water would pass down under there. They'd have all the water wheels and everything. And as stated earlier, Westford has a lot of bodies of water like Keys Pond, Long Stotchford Pond, Nab Lake, and that made it a prime place for water power. That's part of the reason there are so many mills, like the mill we passed earlier, Brookside, like it's right on a river. It makes it prime for industrial development. Coming up is going to be the Wright and Fletcher General Store on 40 Main. It's called the old red store. Is now Pizzeria Presti. It's another place that was featured in the Nab Night by Mr. Jeff Hall. It was just how rooted in tradition the place was. And you can see a local store like that has persisted for 100 years or more. Probably some more like 200 years at this point. I agree with Poe. I do think life in Westford has the potential to be a paradise. It's a place that's very good to grow up in. And I know my parents like to say that it is so good at that it is a bubble. Because it provides this little microcosm as part of a macrocosm of the outside world. But its ability to sustain this nature of tranquility it makes a really constructive place to grow up, I think. We're passing by the millworks right now, as I promised. There used to be a paper mill before Mr. Ewell began to build them out. More railroads. These railroads are active. You can see if you come at the right time, the train is thundering by. And sometimes they hold up traffic. But it's always an inspiring sight. The Red Line, which used to run through a place now called Stone Arch Bridge, the Stone Arch Bridge Trail, has been discontinued, but these railroads remain. And they still are quite active. There's one in my backyard that you can hear at night sometimes. As I was saying, millworks. Director of operations here is named Sandra Hobby, and she runs a place that is a magnificent gathering spot for the community. Most of what I have to say, I've already said. It's rapidly expanding. It used to be, you'll see the words courier. If I turn my head, not fast enough, but it used to be, paper service that was recently renovated, and it's keeping the industrial feel. It's home to, again, that place called CSA Graphics, and it is an area which is building out rapidly. And Westford is neat like that, and it has that sense of community. It has places where people can come together like the library. The library, the J.V. Fletcher Library, its existence was precipitated by they used to just keep a bunch of books in the town hall, and eventually it grew into this thing where they needed the special building, because they had Mr. Edwards build the building. The Westford Historical Society itself was founded in the 50s as a group of people that got together and shared thoughts and artifacts until they needed a place to put them all. And so the Westford Museum was founded. One more thing I want to make note of, we're coming down to the end of our journey here, is Mr. Herb Hildreth. I believe Herb is the proper one, and I'll double check that. A lot of the information, Charles Hildreth created these photo collections of Westford that capture Westford life back in the 1900s, early 1900s, and his collections can be found at the Westford Museum. I highly recommend checking them out. He went through with one Mr. Day as well, Quincy Day, and they put together this collection of all these photos from Westford's history that can still be found there. Provides a fascinating historical perspective. We just passed by St. Catherine's Church, primary Catholic congregation in Westford, also home to the Boy Scout services here, local troops. The Herb Hildreth that I mentioned earlier was a lieutenant in the Continental Militia and also a granite dealer. He was secretary of the J.V. Fletcher Building Committee for a while. was the first. 1935 was the first Apple Blossom Festival. I was looking for the date earlier. World War II kicked that out of whack, but 68 was when it was reinstated. And we're getting close to the end of our ride here, everyone. Got about 2 minutes left. By the way, that building on the right, completely new as of a few months ago. Again, speaking just to how fast Westford is growing. But where I was before we go, I want to thank you all for coming on this tour with me, for listening to me talk for this long. And I hope you gained a sense of how Westford is historically, but also as a place to live, because there's a lot of stuff that people don't know about, and my goal is to provide interesting facts, points of fascination for people, because there's a lot here. It's an absolutely wonderful place to grow up, and I hope that you, in looking at the map that I have left, and this footage, will be inspired to follow along sometime and really explore what this place is and what it has to offer. Another mill building. These can be found everywhere in Westford. And ironically, we are coming up on a place called First Street. The series of roads back here are like First, Second, Third, Fourth. And I think it's only fitting that First Street is our last destination here. Thank you.